He wasn't supposed to be heard. Not here. Not over the steady rush of tires slicing through wet asphalt at 45 miles an hour. Not beneath the low hum of a city that had already decided to look past him. The sound was too small, too thin, barely more than a thread of breath tangled in the cold evening air. And yet it was there, a broken whimper, fading in and out like a signal no one was meant to catch. The kind of sound that disappears before anyone can feel guilty for ignoring it. The kind that usually does. The sky hung low over the roadside, a dull gray ceiling pressing down on everything, carrying the scent of rain and old concrete. Headlights streaked by in long, in different lines, each one briefly illuminating the edge of the shoulder before vanishing again into motion. And there, barely visible between a rusted guardrail and a shallow ditch filled with muddy water, was the source of it. A German shepherd puppy, no more than a few weeks old, its fur matted and damp, its body curled in on itself like it was trying to become smaller than the world that had forgotten it. Its ribs rose and fell too fast, too shallow. Its tiny paws trembled against the gravel, claws scraping weakly as if searching for something solid to hold on to. But there was nothing. Just cold ground. Just noise. Just distance. Cars passed. People inside them glanced, maybe, or maybe they didn't. It's hard to tell the difference when no one stops. A delivery truck rumbled by, close enough to stir the air around the puppy, sending a shiver through its fragile body. It let out another cry, softer this time. Almost a question. Almost gone. Somewhere down the road, a traffic light shifted from red to green, and the flow of motion surged again, faster now, more urgent, like the world had someplace better to be. The puppy's head lifted slightly, just enough for its eyes to open. Dark, glassy, unfocused, looking at nothing, or maybe waiting for something it didn't understand, waiting for a sound to answer its own. But nothing came, not at first, not until a pair of boots hit the pavement a few yards away. Slow, measured, out of rhythm with everything else. The man hadn't planned to. Stop. That's the truth. Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole had walked this stretch of road before, cutting through on his way back from a late shift. His mind somewhere far from here, somewhere quieter, somewhere he didn't have to feel so much. He wore the weight of habit like armor, eyes forward, steps steady, the kind of man who had learned how to keep moving no matter what tried to pull him back. And for a moment, he kept walking. The sound reached him, but he didn't react. Not right away. Because sometimes your mind hears something your heart isn't ready to answer. One step, then another, then a third, and then he stopped. Not because the sound got louder. It didn't. If anything, it faded. That was what did it. The absence of it. The sudden, terrifying quiet where something fragile had been fighting to exist just seconds before. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, a flicker of something crossing his face, something he didn't name. He turned his head, just enough to look back over his shoulder. The world behind him looked the same as it always did. Gray, vet, uninterested. But there was a space there now, a silence that didn't belong. He exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that comes before a decision you don't want to make. His boots shifted on the pavement. For a second, it seemed like he might keep going, like he might let the moment pass the way everyone else had. And then, he turned around. The distance between him and the puppy wasn't far, maybe 15 feet, but it felt longer. Each step carried a quiet tension, like crossing into something that would ask more of him than he had planned to give. The wind picked up slightly, brushing against his jacket, carrying that faint scent of damp fur and cold earth. And then he saw it, really saw it, the small, trembling shape pressed against the ground, barely moving now. Too tired to cry, too tired to try. Ethan slowed as he approached, his shadow falling across the puppy like a question. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world kept going around them, loud and distant and unaware. And then, just as he took one more step closer, the puppy's head shifted. Just a fraction. Just enough. Its eyes met his. And something in that look didn't ask for help. It didn't beg. It didn't even hope. It simply stayed, as if whatever strength it had left had been saved for that one moment. As if it had been waiting, not for anyone, but for him. Before we begin, tell me, We're witching from Drop Your Country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story travels. The air did not change when he stepped closer. It stayed cold, indifferent, carrying the same damp scent of rain and roadside dust. But something quieter settled between them, something that did not belong to the passing cars or the fading light. Ethan crouched slowly, the gravel shifting under his boots with a soft crunch that sounded louder than it should have. The puppy did not flinch. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Any creature that small, that exposed, should have tried to pull away, should have found some last spark of fear to protect itself. But this one did not move. It simply watched him, its breathing shallow, uneven, as if each breath had to be remembered before it could be taken. Ethan hesitated, his hand hovering in the space between them, fingers slightly curled, unsure whether he was about to help or interrupt something already slipping away. He had seen that look before. Not in a dog. In men. In places far from here, under skies that did not forgive weakness, where silence came just before everything changed. He swallowed once, slow, controlled, then lowered his hand the rest of the way. His fingers brushed against the puppy's fur. It was colder than he expected. Not just cool from the air, but hollow, like warmth had left without saying goodbye. The puppy's body gave the faintest response, a small tremor, not resistance, not quite relief, just acknowledgement. Still here. Barely. Ethan exhaled through his nose, a quiet breath that carried more weight than sound. He slipped one hand beneath the tiny chest, the other supporting its hind legs, lifting carefully as if the wrong movement might break something that could not be fixed. The puppy weighed almost nothing. That was the second thing that felt wrong. It should have had weight, even a little. Life always does. But this felt like holding a question, instead of an answer. He brought it closer to his chest without thinking, instinct guiding him where logic had not caught up yet. The small body pressed lightly against his jacket, and for a moment, nothing happened. No sudden movement. No hope received. Just contact. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the puppy's head tilted inward, resting against him. A fragile surrender. Ethan's jaw tightened again, but this time he did not look away. A car passed behind him, close enough to send a rush of wind across his back, tugging at his jacket, reminding him of where they were. Out in the open. Exposed. Temporary. He glanced down at the ditch, at the shallow water pooling beneath the guardrail, then back at the road stretching ahead, long and empty in the fading light. This was not a place where anything stayed alive for long. He adjusted his grip slightly, careful, deliberate, then stood. The movement was steady, practiced, the kind that came from years of carrying more than he ever talked about. The puppy remained still in his arms, its breathing faint against his chest, but there. Still there. Ethan looked down at it once more, studying the small face, the half-closed eyes, the quiet persistence of something that had not let go yet. He did not speak, not out loud, but something unspoken passed through him, a decision forming not from thought, but from recognition. He turned toward the road again, but this time, not to leave, to move forward differently. His steps were slower now, measured in a way that had nothing to do with distance and everything to do with what he carried. The city lights ahead flickered on one by one, casting a soft glow across the wet pavement, guiding him towards somewhere warmer, somewhere that might still have a chance to hold what he had picked up from the side of the road. But as he walked, something shifted, not in the world around him, but in the rhythm against his chest. He felt it before he understood it. A pause, then a faint, uneven movement. He stopped mid-step, his body going still as his attention dropped fully to the small life in his arms. For a second, there was nothing, then a slight tightening, a breath that came a fraction, deeper than the ones before. Weak, uncertain, but different. Ethan's eyes narrowed just slightly, not in doubt, but in focus, as if he was listening for something beyond sound. The puppy's paw twitched once, barely noticeable, then stilled again. And in that quiet, fragile moment, standing alone on the edge of a road that had already forgotten them, Ethan realized something he had not allowed himself to believe in a long time. This was not over. Not yet. The lights of the clinic came into view before the sign did, a pale glow cutting through the damp evening, like something steady in a world that had forgotten how to stop. Ethan did not quicken his pace, but something in his steps changed, a quiet urgency beneath the surface, controlled, contained, the way a man moves when he knows there is no room left for hesitation. The puppy remained pressed against his chest, its small body still fragile in his arms. But that faint, uneven rhythm continued, shallow breaths threading together, just enough to hold on. He kept one hand curved protectively around its side, fingers spread as if shielding it from something unseen, his thumb resting lightly against its ribs, counting without meaning to. 1. Pause. 2. Another pause. Still there. The glass door of the clinic reflected his shape before he reached it, a lone figure carrying something too small to belong to the weight in his expression. He pushed it open with his shoulder, the soft chime above the frame sounding almost out of place, too gentle for the tension he carried inside. Warm air met him immediately, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and clean fabric, a contrast so sharp it almost felt unreal after the cold roadside. Behind the counter, a woman in light blue scrubs looked up, her expression shifting from routine to alert in the span of a second. She noticed the way he held the puppy before she said a word. "I need help," Ethan said, his voice low, steady, but edged with something that did not ask twice. She was already moving. "Bring him here," she replied, stepping out from behind the counter, clearing a space on the examination table with quick, practiced hands. Ethan approached, slower now, careful as if each step had to be negotiated with the life he carried. He set the puppy down gently, his hands lingering a fraction longer than necessary, reluctant to break the contact that had held it together this far. Under the bright overhead light, the small body looked even more fragile, for clinging damply to its skin, chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven pulls. The veterinarian leaned in, her movements efficient but not rushed, fingers checking for response, eyes scanning, listening in a way that went beyond sound. "How long has he been like this?" she asked without looking up. Ethan shook his head slightly. "I do not know. I just found him." The answer felt incomplete, but it was all he had. She nodded once, understanding more than the words gave her, then reached for a stethoscope, placing it gently against the puppy's chest. For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath with her. Ethan stood just to the side, his hands now empty but not at rest, fingers flexing slightly, as if they still remembered the shape they had been holding. He watched her face, not the dog, reading the subtle shifts in her expression the way he had learned to read terrain, looking for signs before they were spoken. Her brow tightened just slightly. Not panic, not relief, something in between. "He is very weak," she said quietly, "but there is still a heartbeat." The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Still, not gone, not yet. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing just enough to make room for something else. Not hope, not fully, but the space where it might exist. The veterinarian moved quickly now, preparing a small line, warming blankets, gentle, precise actions that filled the room with motion but never chaos. She glanced at him briefly. "He might not make it through the night," she added, not unkindly, just honest. Ethan did not respond right away. His gaze had shifted back to the puppy, to the faint rise and fall of its chest, to the way its paw lay curled slightly inward, as if holding on to something only it could feel. He stepped closer again without thinking, drawn back to that fragile center. The puppy's breathing faltered once, a small hitch, barely noticeable, then resumed. But Ethan saw it. He saw all of it, and something in his chest tightened in answer. He lowered his hand slowly, placing it near the edge of the table, not touching it first, just close enough to feel the faint warmth that was still there. For a moment, nothing changed. The machines hummed softly, the room steady, controlled. Then almost imperceptibly, the puppy's paw shifted. Just a fraction, just enough to brush against his fingers. Ethan's hand stilled completely, his breath catching in a way he did not expect. He did not move. He did not speak. He simply stayed there, letting that small, accidental contact remain, as if breaking it might take something with it. The veterinarian glanced up briefly, noticing the subtle change, but said nothing. Some things did not need explanation. The puppy's breathing remained weak, uncertain, balanced on a line too thin to trust. But that small movement lingered, a quiet defiance against everything that said it should not. And as Ethan stood there, unmoving, his hand still resting at the edge of that fragile connection, one thought settled in without permission. This was not just a rescue, not just a moment. This was something choosing to stay, and it was not clear why. Time did not move the same way inside the clinic. Outside, cars still passed, lights still shifted, people still moved from one place to another without noticing what they left behind. But in here, everything narrowed to breath and silence, and the quiet fight happening on a table no bigger than a few feet across. The veterinarian worked with steady hands, wrapping the puppy in warm cloth, adjusting a small line, checking its response again and again with the kind of patience that came from knowing that sometimes survival did not arrive all at once, but in fragments. Ethan did not step away. He stood close enough to feel the warmth from the overhead light, close enough to hear the faint rhythm of the puppy's breathing even without the equipment, his attention fixed in a way that blocked out everything else. The room could have emptied and he would not have noticed. "We need to keep him warm," the veterinarian said, softly, more to the space than to him, as she placed another layer of blanket over the fragile body. "And we watch. That is all we can do right now. Watch." The word settled heavily. Ethan had spent years in places where watching meant waiting for something to go wrong, where stillness was never truly safe, only quiet before change. He knew that kind of waiting. He had carried it with him long after he left. But this was different. There was no enemy here, no sound of distant movement to read, just a small life balanced on something too thin to see. He lowered himself into the chair beside the table without realizing he had decided to stay. His posture remained upright, controlled, but his presence shifted, less like a visitor and more like something anchored. The puppy's breathing stuttered again, a faint interruption that made his focus sharpen instantly. His hand moved before his thoughts caught up, resting gently against the edge of the blanket, not pressing, not interfering, just there. "Easy," he murmured, the word barely audible, more breath than voice. The puppy did not open its eyes. It did not respond in any obvious way. But the next breath came, and then another, uneven, fragile, still there. The veterinarian glanced at him briefly, noticing the way he leaned in, the way his presence seemed to narrow the space around the puppy. She did not interrupt. Some things worked better without explanation. Minutes stretched, or maybe they folded. It was hard to tell. The clock on the wall ticked quietly, marking time in a way that felt separate from what was happening on the table. Ethan's gaze did not waver. He tracked every rise of the small chest, every pause that lasted a second too long, every subtle shift that might mean something or nothing at all. At some point, the lights outside deepened, the glow turning softer, more distant. Night had settled fully, unnoticed. The puppy's breathing slowed slightly, not stronger, not yet, but less frantic, as if the edge it had been clinging to had steadied just enough to hold its weight. Ethan exhaled again, a slow release that carried something quieter with it. Not relief, not yet, but the absence of immediate loss. His fingers shifted slightly, brushing against the blanket, and for a moment he thought he imagined it. A faint pressure, so small it could have been nothing. He stilled completely, every instinct narrowing to that single point of contact. It came again. Not movement, not quite, just a suggestion of it. The puppy's paw, hidden beneath the cloth, pressing lightly, as if responding to something it could not see. Ethan's throat tightened subtly, his jaw setting as something deeper stirred beneath the surface of his composure. He had seen men hold on like this, not with strength, but with something quieter, something that refused to let go even when the body had already begun to fade. "You are not done," he said under his breath, the words low, steady, carrying more weight than volume. The veterinarian adjusted the line once more, checking the puppy's response, then paused. "Sometimes," she said quietly. They choose to stay for a reason. Ethan did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the small form in front of him, on the fragile rhythm that had not stopped. Or someone, he replied, almost without thinking. The room fell quiet again after that, the kind of silence that did not feel empty, but full of something waiting to be understood. The puppy's breathing continued, still uneven, still uncertain, but no longer fading. And as Ethan sat there, unmoving, his hand resting near that small, persistent life, one question settled deeper than the rest. Not whether it would survive, but why it was still trying. The room felt smaller now, not because the walls had moved, but because everything inside it had narrowed to a single fragile line between staying and letting go. The overhead light hummed softly, steady and indifferent, casting a pale glow over the small form wrapped in layers of warmth that seemed too large for something so close to disappearing. Ethan had not shifted from his chair, not in any way that mattered. His posture remained still, his presence anchored, as if movement itself might disturb whatever quiet balance had formed. The puppy's breathing changed again. Not stronger, not yet, but different. Each inhale came with a slight hesitation. Now, a pause that stretched just long enough to make the next breath uncertain. Ethan noticed immediately. His eyes sharpened, focus tightening to the smallest details, the way they had in moments where everything depended on what others missed. One breath, then a pause. Longer this time. His fingers pressed lightly against the edge of the blanket, not touching the body beneath, but close enough to feel the absence where warmth should have been. "Come on," he said quietly, the words steady but edged with something deeper, something that did not belong to discipline or training. The next breath came. Shallow, uneven, but came. The veterinarian adjusted the line again, her movements calm, precise, but her eyes lingered a fraction longer on the small rise and fall of the puppy's chest. She did not speak right away. Sometimes words broke things that silence could hold together. The machine nearby gave a soft, irregular sound. Not an alarm, not a warning, just a reminder that the line was still there, still fragile. Ethan leaned forward slightly, the movement subtle but deliberate, bringing himself closer to that quiet center. The world outside the room no longer existed for him. There was no road, no passing cars, no memory waiting to pull him elsewhere. Just this, just now. The puppy's breathing faltered again. This time, the pause stretched further. Too far. Ethan's chest tightened instinctively, his breath catching in response, as if his body had forgotten its own rhythm in the absence of another. His hand moved without hesitation now, resting gently over the blanket, closer than before, his palm hovering just enough to feel the faintest trace of life beneath. "Stay with me," he said, his voice low, steady, but no longer guarded. It carried something else now, something unprotected, the kind of tone a man does not use unless he has already decided what loss would cost him. For a second, nothing answered. The stillness deepened, pressing against the edges of the room, making even the quiet hum of the lights feel distant. The veterinarian looked up, her expression shifting slightly. Not panic, not yet, but aware. Watching, waiting. Ethan did not look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the small form beneath his hand, his focus absolute. "You are not alone," he added, softer now, the words almost a whisper, but firm in a way that did not allow doubt. The silence held, and then it broke. Not loudly, not suddenly, just a small, uneven inhale, drawn in like it had to be remembered before it could happen. Ethan's shoulders dropped a fraction, the tension easing just enough to let something else in. The next breath followed, then another, still fragile, still uncertain, but no longer slipping. The veterinarian exhaled quietly, a breath she had been holding without realizing it. "There it is," she murmured, more to herself than to him. But Ethan had already seen it, already felt it. His hand remained steady, his presence unchanged, as if he had become part of the rhythm the puppy was holding on to. Minutes passed again, but this time they felt different. Not shorter, not easier, but less like waiting for an end and more like holding space for something that refused to disappear. The puppy's breathing steadied slightly, the pauses shortening, the pattern becoming just enough to trust without fully believing. And then, without warning, something else shifted. The small body beneath the blanket moved. Not a tremor, not a reflex, a deliberate motion. Weak, slow, but unmistakable. Ethan's eyes narrowed, his focus sharpening instantly. The blanket lifted just slightly as the puppy's head shifted beneath it, turning, searching without sight. And then it found him. The movement stopped the moment it reached the direction of his hand, as if guided by something it did not understand. As if that single point in space had become the only place that mattered. Ethan did not move, did not breathe differently. He simply stayed. And in that quiet, fragile moment, something settled deeper than hope. Not certainty, not yet, but recognition. This was not just survival. This was connection, and it was choosing him. The shift did not come with sound. It came with weight. Not the kind you could measure, not pounds or ounces, but something deeper, something that settled into the space between Ethan's hand and the fragile life beneath the blanket. The puppy no longer felt like it was slipping away. It felt like it was holding on, barely, quietly, but with intention. Ethan remained still, his palm hovering just close enough to feel the faint warmth returning in uneven pulses, like embers refusing to go dark. He did not move his hand. He did not pull back, because somewhere in that fragile contact, something had changed. The veterinarian stepped back slightly, giving space without announcing it, her eyes still watching, still measuring, but no longer preparing for the worst. "He is responding," she said softly, her voice steady but carrying a note of something she had not allowed herself earlier. Not relief, not yet, but recognition. Ethan did not answer. His focus had narrowed even further, drawn into the subtle rhythm beneath his hand, into the small movements that would have been invisible to anyone not looking for them. The puppy's breathing steadied again, not strong, not full, but consistent enough to begin forming a pattern. Inhale, pause, exhale. A fragile rhythm, but a rhythm all the same. And then, without warning, Ethan felt it. Not a movement this time. A grip, weak, faint, but deliberate. The tiny paw beneath the blanket pressed against his hand, not by accident, not by chance, but with the smallest trace of purpose. Ethan's breath caught, his body going completely still, as if even the air around him might disrupt it. His fingers did not close. He did not return the pressure. He simply allowed it to be there, meeting it without overwhelming it. "That is it," he murmured, his voice lower now, softer, carrying something unguarded, something that had been locked away for longer than he cared to admit. The puppy did not open its eyes. It did not lift its head, but the grip remained, faint but present, like a signal sent from somewhere deeper than strength. The room held that moment in silence. Even the quiet hum of the lights seemed to fade back, as if giving space to something that did not belong to sound. Ethan's gaze softened slightly, the hard edges of control giving way to something else, something quieter, something that did not need to be named to be understood. He had seen men reach out, like this before, not with strength, but with trust. Not because they knew they would survive, but because they needed someone to stay long enough to find out. His throat tightened subtly, a reaction he did not fight this time. "You are stubborn," he said under his breath, the faintest trace of something almost like a smile touching the edge of his expression, though it did not fully form. "Good." The puppy's breathing deepened just slightly, each inhale carrying a fraction more weight than before, as if the act of holding on had begun to teach the body how to stay. The veterinarian moved closer again, checking quietly, adjusting nothing, just observing. "That should not be enough," she said, almost to herself, her eyes flicking between the small form and Ethan's unmoving hand. "But sometimes it is." Ethan did not look at her. He understood without needing the explanation. Some things were not about enough. They were about choosing. And something here had made that choice. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time had lost its edges. The puppy's grip weakened slightly, not from slipping, but from easing like it no longer needed to hold as tightly to prove it was there. Ethan did not move his hand away. He let the contact fade naturally, respecting the quiet rhythm that had formed between them. The breathing remained, steady enough now to believe in for more than a second at a time. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the puppy's eyes flickered. Not open, not fully, just a slight movement beneath the lids, as if awareness was beginning to return from somewhere far away. Ethan leaned in a fraction closer, his voice dropping even lower. "Stay here," he said, not as a command, not as an order, but as something closer to a promise. The small body shifted again, faint but deliberate, turning just slightly toward the sound of his voice, toward the place where his presence had never left. And in that quiet, fragile turn, something deeper settled into the space between them. Not just survival, not just connection, trust. And it was only beginning. The first sound was not a cry. It was smaller than that. A breath that carried shape, a faint tremor of air that almost formed into something more before settling back into silence. But it was different. Ethan heard it immediately, not with his ears alone, but with the part of him that had been listening long before anything changed. His head tilted slightly, his focus sharpening as his eyes locked onto the small form beneath the blanket. The puppy's chest rose again, this time with a fraction more depth, a little more certainty behind the motion, as if the body had begun to remember how to stay without asking permission. Ethan did not move. He had learned that lesson well. When something fragile chooses to come back, you do not rush it. You do not reach for it too quickly. You stay still enough for it to trust the space you are holding. The veterinarian noticed it too. She stepped closer again, slower this time, her hands no longer preparing for intervention, but observing, respecting the quiet rhythm that had taken hold. "There is more strength now," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet acknowledgement of something she had not expected to see tonight. Ethan did not answer. His attention had narrowed completely, drawn into the subtle changes that unfolded in front of him. The puppy's head shifted again beneath the blanket, a little more deliberate than before, a small effort that carried weight beyond its size. And then, slowly, almost as if it had to push through something unseen, the eyes opened. Not fully, not clear, just a thin line of awareness breaking through, unfocused, uncertain, but present. Ethan felt something in his chest tighten and release at the same time, a reaction he did not control and did not hide. He leaned forward slightly, just enough for his voice to reach without disturbing the space between them. "There you are," he said quietly, the words steady but softer than anything he had spoken all night. The puppy's gaze did not settle immediately. It moved slightly, unfixed, searching without understanding, as if the world had returned too quickly for it to recognize. But then it slowed. It paused, and it found him, not with clarity, not with recognition, but with something deeper than sight. The moment held. The room seemed to fall away again, leaving only that fragile line of connection, that silent exchange that did not need explanation. The puppy's breathing deepened once more, each inhale carrying a little more strength, each exhale less uncertain than the one before. Ethan's hand remained close, still, grounded in the space that had become familiar. He did not reach forward. Not yet. He let the puppy come to him in its own time, in its own way. The veterinarian adjusted the blanket slightly, careful not to break the moment, her movements slower now, almost reverent. "He is coming back," she said, her voice quieter than before, as if speaking too loudly might undo what had been given. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly, but this time it was not from tension. It was from something deeper, something that had not had space to surface until now. Relief. Not complete, not safe, but real. The puppy blinked once, a slow, unsteady motion, then again, the eyes opening a fraction wider, enough to hold the shape of the man in front of it. And then something else happened. The small body shifted forward, just slightly, just enough for the head to press weakly against the edge of the blanket in the direction of Ethan's hand. It was not strong. It was not steady. but it was intentional. Ethan's breath caught again, softer this time, as his hand finally moved, closing the small distance between them. His fingers rested gently against the side of the puppy's head, not pressing, not guiding, just present. The contact was immediate. The puppy stilled, its breathing evening out further, the fragile rhythm settling into something that could almost be trusted. Ethan's thumb brushed lightly once, a small, careful motion, and for the first time since he had found it, the puppy made a sound. Not a cry, not a whimper, just a soft exhale that carried something like relief. The kind of sound that comes when something no longer feels alone. Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, just a second, as something inside him shifted, something he had held in place for too long finally loosening its grip. When he opened them again, the puppy was still there, still breathing, still choosing to stay. And in that quiet, fragile space, the fight that had once been silent now had a witness. And it was no longer fighting alone. The night had settled fully outside, pressing softly against the windows, turning the clinic into a quiet island of light in a world that had already moved on. Inside, the air felt warmer now, not just from the heaters or the blankets, but from something less visible, something that had taken root in the space between a man and a life that had almost disappeared. Ethan had not noticed how long he had been sitting there. Time had stopped behaving like something measurable. It had stretched, folded, and then quietly disappeared altogether, leaving only moments that mattered and the fragile thread connecting them. The puppy's breathing had changed again, not in sudden leaps, not in dramatic shifts, but in small, steady corrections, each one building on the last, like a rhythm relearning itself piece by piece. Inhale, exhale, no longer searching, no longer hesitating as much, still delicate, still vulnerable, but no longer slipping. Ethan's hand remained where it had been, resting gently against the side of the puppy's head, his touch light enough not to weigh it down, but present enough to be felt. The puppy leaned into it now, not by accident, not by reflex, but with a quiet, instinctive trust that had not been there before. It was subtle, a fraction of an inch, but it was enough to change everything. Ethan noticed it immediately. Of course he did. His thumb moved slightly, a slow, careful motion, brushing along the edge of the puppy's fur. The response came almost instantly. The breathing steadied further. The small body relaxed just enough to release the tension it had been holding onto since before he had found it. The veterinarian watched from a short distance, her posture no longer tense, her hands resting loosely at her sides. She had seen recoveries before. She had seen animals pull back from the edge. But this was different. "He is stabilizing," she said quietly, her voice calm, but carrying a quiet respect for what she was witnessing. Ethan gave a small nod, barely perceptible, his attention never leaving the puppy. He did not need confirmation. He could feel it. The difference was in the weight beneath his hand, in the way the breathing now followed a pattern that did not feel like it would disappear if he looked away for a second. The puppy's eyes remained half open, no longer searching, no longer lost. They had settled, not fully aware, not yet, but anchored, and always they returned to him. The sound of a clock somewhere deeper in the clinic marked the passing of another hour, though it felt like something else entirely had been measured. Ethan shifted slightly in his chair for the first time, not pulling away, not breaking contact, just adjusting enough to stay without strain. The puppy responded again, a small movement, pressing closer into the warmth of his hand, as if that point of contact had become something essential. Ethan exhaled slowly, a quiet breath that carried something unfamiliar. Not tension, not vigilance, something softer, something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time. "You picked a fight you should not have won," he murmured, his voice low, steady, but touched with something almost like disbelief. The puppy made a faint sound in response, not a cry, not a whimper, just a soft, breathy noise that lingered for a second before fading. But it was enough to confirm that it was not just holding on anymore. It was beginning to return. The veterinarian stepped closer again, checking gently, her movements careful not to disrupt the fragile peace that had formed. If he keeps this up, she said, glancing at Ethan, he might make it through the night. Ethan's eyes flickered briefly, acknowledging the words, but not fully accepting them yet. He had learned not to trust outcomes too early. But this felt different. Not guaranteed, but possible. The puppy shifted again, its head pressing more firmly against his hand now, its small body settling into the blankets, as if it had finally found a place that did not ask it to struggle, just to exist. Ethan's fingers curved slightly, not holding, not restraining, just shaping around the space the puppy had chosen. The clinic remained quiet. The world outside remained distant. And in that stillness, something had changed in a way that could not be. Undone. This was no longer about saving a life. That moment had already passed. This was about what came after. About what it meant to be chosen when you were not looking. About what it meant to stay when you could have walked away. The puppy's breathing continued, steady now, soft but sure. Its eyes remained half open, resting, but aware enough to follow the presence that had not left its side. And Ethan did not move. Not because he had to, but because he no longer wanted to. Morning did not arrive all at once. It slipped in quietly, a thin line of pale light pressing against the edges of the clinic windows, softening the shadows that had held the room through the night. The world outside began to move again, distant and unaware, but inside, the rhythm remained steady, unchanged by the passing hours. Ethan was still there, not in the way someone waits, counting minutes, watching for an ending. He was there in the way something stays when it has already chosen not to leave. His posture had shifted at some point, the rigid control of the night giving way to something more natural, more grounded. One arm rested along the edge of the table, his hand still curved gently where it had remained for hours, a quiet anchor in a space that no longer felt uncertain. The puppy slept now, not the fragile, restless drifting of before, but something deeper. Its breathing had settled into a slow, even rhythm, each rise of its small chest carrying a quiet certainty that had not existed when the night began. The tension in its body had released completely, replaced by a softness that spoke of safety rather than survival. Its head rested against Ethan's hand, not out of need anymore, but out of something closer to trust. The veterinarian stepped back into the room, a cup of coffee in her hand, her movements unhurried as she took in the scene before her. She did not speak right away. Some moments did not ask for interruption. She had seen enough to understand what had happened here, even if she could not explain it in the language of medicine or reason. He made it through, she said finally, her voice low, carrying a quiet acknowledgement rather than celebration. Ethan nodded, once a small motion, but one that held more weight than it appeared. He did not look at her. His gaze remained on the small life that had chosen to stay. He did, he replied, his voice steady, but softer than it had been the night before. The puppy stirred slightly, not waking, just shifting, its head pressing a little more firmly into the space it had claimed. Ethan's fingers adjusted instinctively, maintaining the contact without disturbing the rest it had found. The veterinarian watched for a moment longer, then set her coffee down. "We will need to keep him here a few days," she said gently. "Make sure he is strong enough." Ethan finally looked up, meeting her gaze for the first time since the night had begun. There was no hesitation in his expression, no uncertainty. "He will not be alone," he said. It was not a question. It was not a request. It was a quiet statement of fact. The veterinarian studied him for a second, then gave a small nod. She understood. Some bonds did not wait for permission. Outside, the light grew stronger, the gray of early morning giving way to a clearer sky, the kind that promised nothing and everything at the same time. Inside, nothing rushed to match it. The room remained still, grounded in a moment that did not need to move forward to be complete. The puppy's eyes flickered open briefly, just enough to catch a glimpse of the shape beside it, the presence that had never left. It did not lift its head. It did not need to. It simply stayed where it was, breathing evenly, existing without effort. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, not breaking contact, just allowing himself a fraction of space, a breath that did not carry tension or urgency. His gaze softened, not with relief, not entirely, but with something deeper. Recognition. This had not been about chance. Not entirely. Some things did not happen because they were likely. They happened because something, somewhere, chose not to let go. He looked down at the puppy again, the faint rise and fall of its chest, the quiet way it had settled into the space beside him, as if it had always belonged there. He did not smile. Not fully, but something close to it touched the edges of his expression. "You are staying," he said quietly, not as a command, not as a hope, but as something already decided. The puppy did not respond. It did not need to. Its breathing remained steady. Its presence remained certain. And in that stillness, in that quiet space between what almost ended and what chose to continue, something remained unspoken but understood. Some lives do not fight because they are strong. They fight because someone finally hears them. And sometimes that is enough. On a cold roadside where no one chose to stop, a German Shepherd puppy lay fading in a silence until a U.S. Marine slowed down and made a decision that would change two lives in ways neither of them expected. This cinematic journey unfolds as one of the most emotional animal stories, following a wounded soul on four paws and a battle-worn soldier whose quiet strength becomes the only thing standing between life and loss. Through dim clinic lights, fragile breaths, and a night that refused to end, this story reveals how animal stories can carry more than survival. They carry connection, trust, and something deeper than logic. As the puppy clings to life with barely a heartbeat, the Marine refuses to walk away, and in that stillness a bond forms that speaks louder than words, reminding us why animal stories continue to resonate across generations. This is not just about rescue, but about the unseen moment when a life chooses to stay because someone chose to care, a theme that defines the most powerful animal stories. As the night stretches into morning, the fragile fight becomes a quiet miracle, showing that sometimes healing begins with nothing more than presence, patience, and a hand that does not leave. Through subtle emotional shifts and a deeply human perspective, this narrative stands among the most touching animal stories ever told, blending realism with cinematic depth. The Marine does not just save the puppy. He rediscovers something within himself, proving that in the world of animal stories, rescue is never one-sided. And in the final stillness, where breath steadies and trust replaces fear, this story reminds us that even the smallest act of mercy can echo far beyond a single moment, leaving behind a quiet grace that defines the very heart of unforgettable animal stories.